Everyone, John with iTap here again. Another beer recommendation, and while I'm going to keep it something classic and sort of my favorites, I am stepping away from the international cooler and heading to the domestic cooler to talk about Boulevard Tank 7, or what I would say one of the best or one of the greatest beers um, ever made, at least one of the greatest craft beers ever made in the United States, certainly within the Midwest. Very, very important beer as well. Tank 7 is 8.5% alcohol, which is not very high for this style. Saison, or sometimes you'd see this beer called Farmhouse Ale. Saison and Farmhouse Ale, essentially interchangeable name, so don't worry about that too much. The 8.5% alcohol is going to be a little bit high in terms of what you normally find in a Saison, which generally, don't get above 7%. Six and a half is kind of more common for the style. When you hear the term saison, just think season, because the beers were originally made in the southern part of Belgium by farmers, and they make them in their barns or whatnot, or farmhouses. They're farmhouse ale, and they would be made to be ready for harvest season for the people working on the farms, so they could give the beers to people helping them take care of the farms in the harvest season. And I'm assuming they're much lower alcohol back in the day, but seeing as how they were sort of made by each farmer, and you don't have a whole lot of consistency in terms of ingredients, water quality, sanitation. You're using probably wooden barrels and buckets and whatnot back then, not these hyper clean stainless steel facilities. I'm sure you've been to a brewery before. These are very, very clean places, and so you would have a lot of different beers. There wasn't really a consistent sort of beer being made. Probably dependent on the region, dependent on the brewer or the farmer that was making them, depending on what was available that year for them to use. So you kind of had a little bit of everything. And that's kind of what a saison gets you. Normal saison is going to have, this color, a straw golden color, sort of like this. It's going to have, wildflowers, notes of like hay, lemongrass, things like that, pepper. Not a whole ton in the hops department. But hops are going to be there just a little bit. And so kind of take everything that I just said about the saisons and sort of ramp it up a little bit. You think about a Tank 7, so it's going to be a little bit maybe darker. This beer's going to be a little bit darker than maybe a straw. Golden is, almost like a little bit of an orange hue to it. Huge pepper notes, big floral notes. This is a little more hop forward than a standard saison. It's 38 IBUs, which isn't a ton, but for a saison, it's a little bit higher. And if you do drink this beer, the hops definitely are apparent. I've had this beer probably a million times, and it still holds up. It's still complex. There's still a whole lot going on. I feel like it's one of those beers. It's like you kind of figure something else out every time you drink it, depending on the glass that's used or the temperature, sort of what mood you're in, or what you've just what you've just eaten. Beer has a lot of those floral notes in it, like I was talking about. It is a little more hop forward, and there is the finish is a little bit of bitterness from the hops, but that's where the alcohol shows up. There's a nice drying sort of alcohol kick at the end, but it's very pleasant. It fits very much with the beer. Just a heads up, this beer is extraordinarily drinkable at 8.5%. And as someone who's been selling craft beer for a little over a decade now, this is one of the number one, if not the number one beer I see, let's say craft beer novices get into trouble with. But like I said before, one of the greatest beers, at least made in the Midwest, if not the country, in terms of craft beer. The reasoning behind that is there is so much going on in this beer. It is a rather complex beer, but at the end of the day, it's extraordinarily drinkable, like I was just saying. So it found a lot of fans. And for someone like me that sells craft beer, and the thing that I think, I'm pretty good at, and that, iTap does a pretty good job of, is sort of recommending beers and getting people to try new things. And in my opinion, this was the ultimate gateway beer, because there are so many different components that each person could kind of say, oh, I like this part of it, I like this part of it, I like this part of it. And so you could really find, you know, a new direction to go with them. This is a great way to get beer for people who think, you know, hey, I don't like hops, or none of my friends like hops. Maybe they're a wheat beer drinker, Blue Moon drinker, Boulevard wheat drinker, or something. Get them this. The hops aren't going to overpower them, but there's going to be enough in there. They're going to say, hey, what's that nice little floral, you know, bit of floral, a little bit of fruitiness I'm picking up. There's a really good chance that could be the hops. And they go, okay, maybe I can actually drink some hops now. So this is a good way to get maybe someone onto an IPA that thinks they hate all IPAs. You know, this gets people onto saisons in general, other Belgian styles. You know, higher alcohol beers because there is a noticeable alcohol presence in this beer, and just generally drinking stuff that's a little bit more complex and not just like I want something that goes down fast and is super crisp and that's it. So you know, Tank 7's always done a really good job of that. So cheers, and here's the next one.